Thank you. Can I thank all noble lords for their contribution today, and can I say that it's great to follow Lord Collins, and let me tell him, in the spirit of cross-party politics, every morning I'm proud to walk up the steps in King Charles Street, walk past the statue of Ernie Bevin and recognise a truly great British Foreign Secretary who stood up for this country. He was absolutely right to praise my partner, Lord Ahmed, who's been in post for 7 years. In fact, my last job was 6 years, but between us, 13 years, I think. And I can tell him we're both looking forward to many more years in these posts. Today has been an opportunity for me genuinely to benefit from the accumulated wisdom and experience that resides in this chamber, and it really has been a fascinating debate. We've ranged from Nigeria to Armenia, from universal jurisdiction to sanctions, from individual cases to current crises. And as Noble Baroness Smith said in her opening speech, we're having this debate at an absolutely critical time. Now, I'll try my best to respond to the many comments made. But let me just say by way of introduction, as I've said before, I can't recall such a dangerous time in international affairs during my political career. This was a point Baroness Eaton made, Noble Lord Alton made this point, referring to a time of despots and dictators, but I thought it was very refreshing when the Bishop of Leeds reminded us it is actually the anniversary of the death of Stalin, so some of these things at least come to an end. And Lord Milesford, I think, was right to draw attention, as the Prime Minister did on Friday, to this combined threat of the far right and Islamist extremism. We must respond to all of these threats with strength and unity, and we must always be clear about where British interests lie. And I thought Noble Baroness Ashton put it particularly clearly when she said, as I always do, at the heart, those interests are about our prosperity and our security. I have a clear set of priorities rooted in these interests: supporting Ukraine, building a more stable Middle East, enhancing British security, promoting international development, including green growth, and boosting UK prosperity. And the Foreign Office is working with departments across government to drive these priorities forward. And what I'd say we've done in the last 100 days since I've taken on this job is we've tried to surge our activity to respond to new developments and crises. In the last 113 days, I've visited 26 different countries. I've spoken at 8 different multilateral gatherings, and of course I've tried to account to this House. And I want to thank the Noble Lord Trenchard for kindly saying that I should be focused on this House rather than appearing at the bar of the House of Commons, as entertaining and as fun as that might possibly be. One must always be conscious, but perhaps particularly in this job, not to confuse activity with action. But I hope you can see that the actions we're taking are making a difference. I want to reassure the Noble Baroness Northover on that point. Like Lord Mitchell made a very powerful speech, I've shown solidarity with Israel, seeing the death and destruction wrought at Kibbutz Be'eri on October the 7th, while also speaking out for a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza with my German counterpart, Annalena Baerbock. We've trebled our aid to Gaza and appointed a representative for humanitarian affairs to work intensively in the region to address the blockages to aid reaching Gaza. Much more needs to be done, and I will say more about that in a minute. I've urged allies to stand by Ukraine, joining with Polish Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski to send the clearest possible message to the US Congress that that money needs to be released. Like the Noble Lord Alderdice, I'm proud of the record we have in the UK, and I listened very carefully to what the Most Reverend Primate, the Archbishop of Canterbury, said about we must will the means to the end we want as well as that end. And I think the Noble Lord Fowler was completely right when he said this has to be our highest priority. I've got the 5 things I set out that I want to do, but Ukraine is number 1, and I will say more about that in a minute. We've surged in terms of publishing our sanctions strategy, the first one Britain has ever had. We've imposed travel bans and asset freezes on over 200 individuals or entities. To those in the debate, Lord Hannay and others, the opposition front bench, who mentioned the terrible nature of the Navalny case, the UK was the first to put in place those sanctions on the people that helped to bring about his death, and we should be proud of the action we take. And I'm afraid I don't agree with the Noble Lord Skidelsky on this issue. Sanctions can be an effective weapon, And in this troubled world, we need those sorts of weapons at hand. We published a groundbreaking international development white paper, which I know the Noble Lord Collins has praised. It has the aim of expanding the money for developing countries, especially fragile states, but it also covers a number of subjects, including support for women's rights organizations and all the things including like assistance with climate adaptation. We heard a great speech by Baroness Goody. We are committed to the SDGs. We are also committed to getting back to 0.7, and I just gently point out in the spirit of cross-party cooperation that while it was the Labour Party under Gordon Brown that committed 0.7, it was the Conservative government, a coalition government indeed, under my leadership that achieved 0.7, and I think it's worth remembering that. I won't reveal what Nick Clegg said to me privately when we were pushing for 0.7, because that would be unfair. Action... be careful. Action has also involved talking to people that we don't agree with, including sitting down directly with the Iranian foreign minister and delivering some very tough messages about what Iran is doing in the region, around the world. And indeed, I've had some pretty frank bilateral conversations with my opposite number in China. We've equally surged to sought to strengthen our network of alliances and partnerships around the world. And let me reassure Baroness Sooty that Central Asia is one of those networks where we want to do better. I'm planning a visit there. I'm going to be holding a round table with anyone who knows the industries and businesses and voluntary bodies and educational organizations that we should be talking to there, and she's very welcome to come and join my round table in the Foreign Office and to talk about that. And I think Lord McInnes is absolutely right to include Armenia in a country where we should be thinking about how we try to include them in our network. We've also surged, as it were, to seize the chance for a more constructive relationship with Argentina's new government, without in any way shying away from defending the Falklands' right to their self-determination. And let me reassure Baroness Smith, the Noble Baroness Smith of Newnham, that we are fully committed to the defence of the Falklands. I met with the forces there while on my visit, as well as meeting a number of penguins and others. And I can tell you it is very well defended, with some extremely capable air-to-air missiles and all the other things you'd expect, including typhoons. Let me reassure also Viscount Waverley, the Noble Viscount Waverley, that we're working hard for a deal between the EU, UK and Gibraltar, and I'll look specifically at the point he raised in his speech. We are, of course, investing in our partnership on climate, defence and digital with Brazil. They are hosting the G20 and chairing COP30. What I would say to both the Noble Lords, Lord Purvis and Lord Collins, is that I had the opportunity to explain at that G20 how we're going to expand the balance sheets of the multilateral development banks to surge money into helping with the SDGs. That is our strategy. Let me now turn to other points made by Noble Lords across the House, and let me start with Gaza. We had powerful speeches from the Noble Baronesses, Baroness Morris, Baroness Fall, Baroness Mubarak, Baroness Janka, and the Noble Lords, Lord Sahota and Lord Anderson. But we are facing a situation of dreadful suffering in Gaza. There can be no doubt about that. I spoke some weeks ago about the danger of this tipping into famine and the danger of illness tipping into disease, and we are now at that point. People are dying of hunger, people are dying of otherwise preventable diseases. And the situation is very bad because we've been pushing for this aid to get in. We've had a whole set of things we've asked the Israelis to do, but I have to report to your Lordship's House that the amount of aid that got in February was about half what got in January. So patience needs to run very thin, and a whole series of warnings need to be given, starting, I hope, with the meeting I have with Minister Gantz when he visits the UK tomorrow. We've set out very clearly a set of 5 asks which need to be put in place. The humanitarian pause, the capacity inside Gaza that many noble lords have spoken about, the increased access through both land and maritime routes, including Ashdod Port, which the Noble Lord, Lord Collins mentioned, and of course expanding the type of humanitarian assistance that gets in. Too many items are sent away because they're supposedly dual-use goods, and some of these things are, you know, things that are absolutely necessary for medical and other procedures. And we also need to see a resumption of electricity, water to North and South Gaza. Let me say again at this dispatch box, Israel is the occupying power. It is responsible. And that has consequences, including in how we look at whether Israel is compliant with international humanitarian law. So I think that is the most important thing on the issue of Gaza. Turning to the political process and how, as many noble lords said, how do we try and turn this moment of such disaster into a moment of opportunity? Baroness Northover, the noble Lord Desai, the Bishop of Leeds, Lord Lee, all asked, are we committed to finding an answer? Do we see this as an opportunity? And my answer to that is yes, the situation is terrible, but if we can turn a pause for this hostage deal into a sustainable ceasefire and build momentum so we don't go back to fighting, there is a chance, because I think, as the noble Lord Lee said, there's some exhaustion on both sides. There may be a chance to get to a more of a political solution. I know a number of noble lords, including Lord Hannay, said, are we rather torturing ourselves with this debate between pause and ceasefire? The reason I think this is the right way is by saying a pause, which should happen now. I want it to happen tonight, tomorrow, to stop this killing, is to have a pause, and then you put in place the conditions that make a ceasefire more likely to be permanent. You've got to get the Hamas leadership out of Gaza. You've got to get rid of the terrorist infrastructure. You've got to have a new Palestinian government. You've got to have the horizon towards Palestinian statehood. These things are necessary in order to have a chance of a genuine peace process and outcome. I thought the noble Lord Ricketts and noble Lord Roberts asked absolutely the right question, which is, as part of this, what is the guarantee of security that Israel can have? A two-state solution won't work if Hamas are still running Gaza, and if there aren't guarantees about how secure Israel would be living alongside a Palestinian state. So we have to get that right. Let me reconfirm Britain is committed to a two-state solution, and also reconfirm, following the noble Baroness Hellick's excellent speech on recognition. What I'm saying is that clearly part of a two-state solution is the recognition of Palestine as a state. I don't think that should happen at the start of the process, because I think that takes all the pressure off the Palestinians to reform. But it shouldn't have to wait till the end. And I think the point that Lord Hannay and others made, that we shouldn't give Israel a veto power, which is the effect of the American policy at the moment. And so I think that recognition can become part of the unstoppable momentum we need to see towards a two-state solution. The noble Lord Hayne made a very powerful speech about Gaza, but I don't agree with him. I'll just say about this issue of hypocrisy when we look across to the Ukraine and Russia dossier. There was no 7th of October event in Russia. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was without any justification. It's the simple invasion of one state by another, and I think it is different to the situation with Israel and Gaza. I want to reply very... I'm very sorry. If I have time at the end, I will, but I want to try and get through as many... It's a challenge to try and answer 63 speeches, and I'm determined to be equal to it. Lord Pollock Lord Pollock made a very powerful speech, and I want to answer him directly. Ask the question, do we still believe Hamas-run Gaza can't be a partner for peace for Israel? Correct, it can't be. Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and let me say very clearly, its apologists should not be invited into the FCDO for a seminar. I once said as Prime Minister that when you're Prime Minister, you spend half the time trying to find out what the government's doing, and then you spend the other half of the time trying to stop it. And it turns out that being Foreign Secretary is not entirely different. Let me pay tribute to the very strong speeches by the noble Baronesses Altman and Baroness Deach on UNRWA. And I totally understand the concern about the fact that people that work for that organisation were involved in October the 7th. That is a shocking fact. It has to be properly investigated. There have to be proper undertakings and reforms to that organisation so it can't happen again and it can be put beyond doubt. But what I would say to the House is, if we also want aid delivered, UNRWA is the only body with a distribution network. So we have to have a dose of realism about what we can achieve and how quickly we can achieve it. But the promotion of extremism, that does need to be properly dealt with. Let me turn to Ukraine and Russia. We had some extremely strong speeches from the noble Lords Bruce, Lord Robertson, Baroness Altman spoke about this issue. And I think the common theme was this sense that just more needs to be done. In terms of defining what is more, to me it is really focusing on the military commitment. The Macron event in Paris last Monday was useful because there are a lot of quite simple things every country should do. The countries of Eastern Europe that still have some legacy Soviet ammunition that the Ukrainians can fit into their systems, they should release that immediately. Countries that still have stocks that they could give to the Ukrainians should give those stocks. Every country, and this is a sort of small point, but nonetheless it matters, should check the expiration dates of their weapon systems. If they pass those expiration dates, countries spend a fortune decommissioning them, whereas if you actually find out what the date is and give them to the Ukrainians, they could use them now. But I think what lies behind these speeches and questions is an understanding that Britain has got to do more in boosting its own defence production and scaling up its defence production, not just for Ukraine, but recognising in this more dangerous world we're going to need greater stocks of ammunition and less of a just-in-time concept when it comes to defence production. The noble Lords, Lord Stirrup and Lady Baroness Ashton made very powerful points about when this conflict really started, pointed to 2014. I would point more to 2008. I think that was the moment when we saw that Putin was in the mode of grabbing land and territory without justification. Number of noble lords, Baroness Kennedy, the noble Lord Roberts, talked about frozen assets. Let me explain where I think we've got to. I actually think the moral case is there, that this money should be used for the benefit of the Ukrainian people. I think the economic case is very strong. I don't believe, and here we are in the city of London, as it were, one of the great financial centres of the world, I don't think this will disadvantage us in any way using this money. There are a bunch of different legal justifications, of which collective countermeasures is one that could be used, but there's also the opportunity to use something like a syndicated loan or a bond that effectively uses the frozen Russian assets as surety to give that money to the Ukrainians, knowing that you'll be able to recoup it when reparations are paid by Russia. That may be a better way of doing it. We're aiming for the maximum amount of G7 and EU unity on this, but if we can't get it, I think we'll have to move ahead with allies that want to take this action. I think it is the right thing to do. I agree with the speakers. I very much agree with the noble Baroness Hedrick's speech that Putin will not stop at Ukraine. I think if we allowed Putin a win in Ukraine of any form, I think Moldova would be at risk. I think possibly some of the Baltic states would be at risk. And I'm afraid, although the noble Lord Balfe, we've known each other for many years, I just don't accept this idea that countries that are close to Russia are not allowed to choose. I remember a conversation Tony Blair once reported to me that he had sat down with Putin and said, well, of course, it's up to the Ukrainians to choose. If they want to be in the Russian orbit, that's their choice. And if they want to have a more Euro-Atlantic leaning, that's also their choice. And Putin said, no, they're not allowed to choose. I don't think that's acceptable. I think we should allow democratic, independent countries to make their choices, and we should back them when they make those choices. I listened very carefully to the noble Lord Moore of Etchingham. I'm delighted his 4x4 campaign is succeeding. I will look at boats. I suspect that they were seaworthy enough to get across the channel, but they may not be seaworthy enough to get much further, but let's look at that. Baroness Fall quite rightly reminded us that Putin isn't winning, and we shouldn't fall for that narrative. In fact, he's lost about 25% of his navy in the Black Sea. Moving on to defence, we had a number of very strong speeches, I would say almost unanimously, coming from whatever benches, whether noble Lord Robertson, Baroness Goldie, and others calling for an increase in defence spending. I would say in this government's defence we are heading towards 2.25 fairly rapidly. We have a rising defence budget, and also if you look at the new equipment that's been put in place, whether it's F-35s, whether it's Typhoons, whether it's aircraft carriers, Type 26 frigates, Type 45 destroyers, there's been an enormous uplift in the capacity and capability and quality of what we do. I thought Lord Wallace, the Noble Lord Wallace, was rather gloomy on our capabilities and on our relationship with the United States. I would just make the point that when it comes to defending the sea lanes in the Red Sea and standing up for the freedom of navigation, only 2 countries were prepared to step forward and make that choice, and they were Britain and America. We are a very reliable ally, as we rightly should be. I thought the Noble Lord Stevens made a very powerful speech about running the Ministry of Defence better, and as he ran the Department of Health so well, I thought maybe it was a job application and we should take that up. Moving swiftly to Europe, I started my day with all of the EU ambassadors having breakfast together. I think the mood between Britain and the EU is much stronger now than it's been for many years. The mantra of being friends, neighbours and partners, I think, is true. The Noble Lord Kirkhope made I think, right to make a tribute to the Windsor Framework. It was a great negotiating success by the Prime Minister and should be celebrated. He made a number of suggestions for how, and others did, Noble Lord Anderson did, about how we might improve the trade and cooperation agreement and how we should look at our cooperation with the EU. I think we should pursue this with some thought and some care. I think some of the options of very structured dialogues don't always get you what you want, whereas I think a little bit of ad hocery from our new position might be better, but I have an open mind. A number of Noble Lords talked about green issues. Lord Ahmed was quite right to mention our Blue Belt. Now we've got one round the South Sandwich Islands. We've actually created a bigger blue belt across the oceans of our world than any country ever in history. We should be very proud of it. Baroness Northover, Baroness Bennett, the Noble Lord Oates all spoke about the importance of climate finance, and of course we've got the 11.6 billion committed over the 5 years. The Noble Lord Naseby made a plea about helping small island states. I very much agree about that. I think it's a good moment to think about that in the run-up to the Commonwealth Conference, and we'll have more to say about that soon. A number of important speeches about human rights. Can I absolutely agree with Lord Mackenzie about the case of Vladimir Kara-Murza. I was honoured to meet his wife and his mother in the Foreign Office last week, and again we should call for their freedom, his freedom at every available opportunity. The Noble Lord Alton talked about the importance of gathering evidence of war crimes, something we do and must do more of. The Noble Baroness Prashal and others spoke about how we should act in a way that enhances our moral authority, something that William Hague always used to say, and it sticks with me, that it is important if we are to be taken seriously. The Noble Lord Farmer talked about the persecution of Christians. Let me tell him that he mentioned Fiona Bruce and what a great job she does as the Prime Minister's envoy on religious freedom. And a bill is being passed through the other place and hopefully will come here that will put that on a statutory footing. And that'll be the first time one of those envoy roles will be treated in that way, and I think it's quite right. In terms of Saudi Arabia, let me say to the Noble Baroness Bennett, we always oppose child executions and happy to oppose the ones she mentions. More than that, we oppose the death penalty in every circumstance. And we always raise these cases, and I think the Noble Lord Ahmed has done that in his recent meetings. I think I'll make just one more point because I'm running out of my additional time I've kindly granted myself, and that is to mention development in Africa, where you're very kind, thank you. The Most Reverend Primate, the Noble Lord Boateng, a number of others made speeches about the importance of peacemaking. I thought the Archbishop reminded us of an important fact when he did that acronym of the Foreign Office, preventing conflict and building peace and whatever else it's called, and comparing that with our Lord Jesus just saying, blessed are the peacemakers, proof, if ever we needed that, Jesus was better at sound bites than modern politicians. What I would say to him is we do now put over 50% of our aid into fragile and conflict-affected states. But I think he's right that as part of that, we've got to think what more we can do to surge peacemaking and peacekeeping. A point also made by Lord Purvis and the Bishop of Leeds spoke about Sudan, Noble Baroness Cox about Nigeria, and I would say to them and to Noble Lords Lord Bruce and Lord Oates that actually the aid to Africa, bilateral aid to Africa, where we've just signed off the bilateral agreements, it is going up by 50% this year. So there's some proper big bilateral programs to countries in need, like, for instance, Ethiopia. Final thing I wanted to just refer to before concluding is a number of people made points about strategy. I agree with Lord Young of Old Windsor and the Noble Lord Howell about the importance of the Commonwealth, particularly in this year. I also want to make the point that to those who said they worried about our ambition in terms of diplomacy, Britain does still have the third biggest network of embassies and high commissions and missions around the world. In fact, we just said we're going to open a new one in East Timor, and not every country does that. A lot of discussion of the future of the UN. We're in favour of UN reform, but I would say to Noble Lords that if we want to see a rules-based order and we want to see countries obeying those rules, there are times when the UN Security Council can't deliver because of the Russian veto, because of the Chinese veto, and there are times when you need coalitions to come together to help make that happen. My Lords, to conclude, I'm grateful for all your contributions and for listening so attentively as I close my first debate in this chamber. I've tried to directly address as many Noble Lords' contributions as possible, but it was hard to do all 63. I'll follow up any remaining in writing and place a copy of the letter in the library of your Lordship's house. To return to where I began, I think on issue after issue, you can see the difference we are trying to make together with others. With Ukraine getting grain exported from the Black Sea, with a number of allies signing those long-term bilateral security guarantees, with Jordan and Qatar delivering life-saving aid by land and by air, with states like Kosovo and Moldova boosting their resilience, and with the US and the Commonwealth, we've stood by Guyana. With the multilateral development banks, we're beginning to unlock billions more in development finance. With our overseas territories, we're expanding our magnificent Blue Belt programme. With the Department for Business and Trade, we're negotiating new free trade deals. With the Ministry of Defence, we're increasing European defence production. And with the Home Office, we're returning foreign national prisoners and tackling the smuggling gangs. The challenges we face are considerable. Baroness Stroud, Lord Hannay and others spoke about the changes in the global dynamics we face. They're right. But I believe we can take heart from the work that our amazing diplomats, development experts and intelligence experts are doing, day in, day out, to make our country safer and more prosperous. In a dangerous world, we mustn't shy away from the need to stand by our allies, strengthen our partnerships and make sure our voice is heard. Baroness Neville-Jones, I thought, made an excellent speech when she said, we mustn't accept a glide path to decline or a glide path to war. I completely agree with that. That's what I've been doing since becoming Foreign Secretary, standing up for some simple principles. The right of countries to have their borders respected, the right of the importance of democracy, the importance of freedom. We should demonstrate strength, we should show humanity. That is what the government and I will continue to do in the months ahead.
Yeah.
My Lords, the question is this motion be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content. The contents have it.
Sorry, too long.
My Lords, I beg to move the House do now adjourn.
The House do now adjourn.